All right, well, that is our cue to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining our project scope today. My name is Janelle Preston. I am one of the hub members. If you want to contact any of the hub members, they have an asterisk in front of their name, and we want to thank them for joining us today as well. As you noticed, our session is going to be recorded. It is stored on our Canvas page. If you have access to our Canvas page or would like to gain access, please reach out to us and you can go back and review any of the echo sessions. Please take a minute and rename your profile. That helps us to know who's on the call, where you're from, what your discipline is, that I, as a participant, would know how to reach out to you or who made that amazing comment. So take a minute and do that. We really like this to be interactive. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hand, put those comments into the chat. We'll be monitoring those chats. We do want to make sure that we always protect any individual privacy. So don't use identifiable information. We talk about sensitive topics. Sometimes they are topics that we just don't want everybody to know about. So don't use any information that can identify anybody as we're talking about it. Again, we really want to build this community of practice. It's an interactive community, so please be engaged. Turn on your cameras if you feel comfortable in doing that. I will always do a plug for case narratives. They are the best way to really get that information that we have been learning and gaining more knowledge from our other people in the community. So if you're interested in doing a case study or a case narrative, please reach out to us. There are some components of the echo session. We, once again, want to build that community of practice so that we know who we can reach out to or share information of. Then we always have a didactic speaker, and then we do a case presentation with some additional recommendations. So again, a case study, if you want to learn from each other and share information, please consider, or you just have a case that you're struggling with, bring it to all of us and let us crowdsource that for you. In order to get a certificate of attendance, we want you to fill out the survey. I obviously did not update this slide, so don't click on this survey link. I'll put a new survey link into the chat for our March surveys. So thank you so much to everybody who does those. It really provides us information that we can take back to maintain these trainings free of cost. Canvas is a platform that we use to share all of that information. So any of the previous case recommendations, sessions, those are all on our Canvas access page. So if you have any problems or can't access that, please reach out to Project Scope at usu.edu and we'll get you access to that. I'm thrilled today to have Tami Curtis, who is a licensed clinical social worker. She was born and raised here in Cache Valley. I just barely found that out. So she's used to all the snow. But she is going to share with us a wealth of information about the wellness rooms in the school, and we'll all be jealous because she's down in sunny St. George, Utah, where she's not dealing with any snow. So again, if you
know, there's someone has an open mic and I'm getting a lot of feedback.
It's probably me, and as soon as I go on mute, it will turn off.
It's a phone. Oh, maybe there. I think maybe now it's off.
Okay.
Right. Thanks.
Take a minute and follow us on Facebook or Instagram. We try to share information that we get, resources, any updated information. So if you've not done that, take a minute and follow us on Facebook. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and turn the time over to Tami.
All right, thank you. I am so excited to be here. And I will just preface this with, I know that I am preaching to the choir on this. You are the group that focuses on prevention. So I'm just privileged to be a part of this today. I have the opportunity to work in schools. I am getting some background noise too. I think that there is maybe some unmuted. Okay, I think we've got it now. Let me go back for just a second. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Oh boy. I'm having some difficulties already. Can you hear me okay? There we go. Now my pointer's working. Janelle, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, all right, thank you. So my mission is to build resilient and regulated lifelong learners. And so today, all of our information will tie into those two things. I want to first start out with just some current statistics on mental health that affect us in the schools and in your work, the impact of trauma on the brain, which I think you know so much about already, doing the work for ourselves, some things that I think are really key in helping us. If we are going to be able to help the people around us, it's really important that we have a skill set for ourselves as well, what that looks like in schools and the positive outcomes that we're having. Please feel free to stop me at any time and ask a question. And I'll leave time for questions at the end as well. Why prevention? I was able to start out my career in the mental health field. So I worked as a clinical social worker in the hospital. I did those suicide evaluations in the emergency department and then did inpatient treatment in the behavioral health unit. I also worked in residential treatments, intensive outpatients and residential or outpatient settings. And all of that experience brought me to this thought right here. Many of my clients would say, why am I just learning this now? They need to teach this stuff in school. And I agreed with them because honestly, I didn't learn this stuff until I went to graduate school. And so why aren't we teaching this in school? And if we're ever going to get upstream with our mental health crisis, then we really have to. We have to figure out how do we get this out to everyone. The world has changed. I refer to it as a modern world. And what is this modern world? What kind of maybe opportunities, but also barriers does this give us? There are some interesting statistics, like in a classroom, 5 out of 25 students are coping with trauma. We know that requests for mental health services have gone up, especially since COVID. Services for youth increased by 92%. We know that self-harm increased by 300%, and that is just the codes for services that took place. So we know it was probably much higher. The CDC indicates the rates for adults dealing with depression or substance abuse reached 40% of the population. And we know that ages 16 to 24 suicide is the leading cause of death. And when we read these statistics and we look at that, I think many of us are probably perplexed then at why there is such a lack of funding when it comes to supporting the mental health of our youth and our adults too, our people who really are the people who make up our community. Kids specifically are struggling with the inability to be present in the moment, constantly thinking about what's going on. It's not helpful that many homes are streaming the news many hours of the day. And it's really difficult for an immature brain, a brain that has a prefrontal cortex that's not fully developed, to be exposed to all those images and all these situations, not just in their hometown, but around the world. And it can really create this global sense of, fear. Even if they're not experiencing trauma in their home, this can really impact their thinking about the society and the world that we live in. We've seen more violence, a huge spike in anxiety and depression. Unfortunately, if we look at the emergency department crisis visits in our state, you can see that age 16 is the height. Most of our visits are young women. They account for half of the visits in our area. I know in the whole state, it's a little bit higher. So what we know is that there are risk and protective factors. And we know one of those risk factors is trauma. And one thing that I really like to teach educators is, and I have the task of taking kind of my clinical experience and background and then applying it in a school setting, which looks very differently. So it's certainly been a growth opportunity for me and a labor of love, a work to be able to figure this out. My own son is who propelled me into education, in addition to all of the, thinking around how do we get upstream? How do we get, this to everyone? He has ADHD and sensory processing disorder. And when I worked in one specific residential center that treated substance dependence, 80% of my caseload had ADHD. So that heightened my concern. I was already worried about the little guy, but that heightened my concern even more, realizing how at risk he was for mood altering substances. And so in addition to that, trauma is something that we know increases risk. Trauma is an experience. It's not necessarily a diagnosis. Not everyone who's experienced trauma will develop post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's important to help people recognize that if they've experienced something that involved a threat, either if it was real or perceived, if they felt like they were at risk, that their well-being or life was at risk, if it was so overwhelming it exceeds their capacity to cope, they feel intense fear and lack of control, they feel helpless, all of that will impact their brain, their body, their nervous system. The brain remembers this, or the body remembers this per se, our brainstem, even if our cerebral cortex doesn't. So it really does impact how we see the world. And this can start from a very young age. This early intervention group knows how important those early years are in brain development. And if they're exposed to a traumatic situation or environment that's unsafe, they will see the world as unsafe, right? It's that interpretive lens, how we see the world. For those who grow up in a very safe environment, they will likely see the world as a safe place and see people as trustworthy. So this is complicated in that schools can be very safe and we can have wonderful, loving people that love to educate kids. But when those kids show up, if their worldview is that the world's not safe, they won't trust us, even though we're trustworthy. And that's something we need to know right when they come through the door, that is not something that is readily available for some, that they're really going to need extra support to be able to gain that trust. Our perception is our reality, isn't it? We experience something, it informs our perception about it, which informs our perspective, which informs our reality. So it's also important that we not argue with someone about their worldview or what that is. That is their reality. We've got to meet them where they are and use some empathy. I learned this one way. I was so excited when I moved into my first home and I was able to plant my very own garden, and I couldn't wait to plant these carrots. And I just knew that when harvest time came, I would just have these lovely, vegetables to eat. So imagine my surprise when what I dug up actually looked like this. And I thought, what did I do wrong? These are not what I was expecting. And so I learned a little bit about gardening, right? But see, nobody could have talked me out of my perception. I saw carrots, I bought them at the store, I knew what they looked like. And in my mind, that's what they were going to look like. And nobody could have told me differently. I had to experience that. And so it's a reminder for us that our kids have to have an experience that will impact that worldview. We can't just tell them, right? It's, we can't just say, oh, you can trust me. They actually have to experience that. Trauma changes the brain. You've probably all seen this slide many, many times, but it's important because we can't look at someone and know what they've been through. And so we have to be that emotional detective or that emotion scientist to determine what is their behavior telling me about their brain development. And this scan can help us remember that the brains of people who've been through trauma are actually different. And it just makes sense. Those neural connections aren't made, the neural pathways aren't formed, and therefore they process emotion differently. In the frontal areas where we need activation to learn and take in new information and reason and problem solve, are less active in a brain with trauma because the emotion brain is so lit up. They're in that survival mode. So we really need to understand how the brain is developed from bottom up, and recognizing that we can't access our prefrontal cortex if our amygdala is active. And we know that that is the case with trauma, is that our amygdala is sensitized, so it's overactive. And this impacts how they show up. I saw this at a conference once, this comment, "My amygdala is the jerk, not me." And I thought that might make a good bumper sticker to remind us, because I think a lot of amygdalas get fired when people are driving. And that's an unfortunate result for all of us. But that's a good reminder that when we're seeing people hijacked in fight, flight, or freeze, that is the result of their amygdala protecting them. And that's just the amygdala doing its job. We're just biologically designed that way. Our priorities are survival. And so we just come this way. It's important that we not put demands on people when they're escalated like that. When they're in fight or flight, what they're saying is they need to feel safe. And we can create a safe environment to help them. And that's what we need to do, is create space, let them take a breath, let them take a break, engage their senses so that they can feel safe and get that parasympathetic nervous system activated, so that then their sympathetic nervous system can rest and take a break. So a lot of this is just biology. Probably you've seen the resilience documentary. I use that as a teaching tool for schools to help people recognize that back in 1998 is the first time the medical world and the psychology world came together to really look at long-term health outcomes. And what they found was alarming, but it didn't get a lot of traction immediately. In fact, the doctors involved in that study will tell you nobody wanted to hear about it. But it makes sense, because trauma is uncomfortable to talk about. For most of us who've been through difficult things, it can bring up uncomfortable memories and uncomfortable emotions. And we need to be aware of that and recognize that there are things we can do to feel safe, and grounding in the current present moment is really helpful to recognize that. But this study has given us lots of information. It was with over 17,000 people in Southern California. And it wasn't until 10 years later, when Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris started applying this research in her Center for Youth Wellness in San Francisco, that this really started to get out to the rest of us. And then in 2016 is when they produced the Resilience documentary. We learned what those 10 ACEs were. And I remind people, these aren't the only 10 ways that people can experience trauma. There's many ways based on the definition of trauma as an experience. But we know that risk goes up. Risk for social problems, risk for health problems goes up with the more ACEs that we experience before the age of 18. And so looking at that risk for drug use, for alcohol, lost time at school or work, health problems, disease over time, and just some specific things. We know if people have an ACE score of 5 or more, they're 7 to 10 times more likely to report drug addiction compared to those without ACEs. But this makes sense, right? And I'll just give you an example. I once had a client that when he described what drugs did to him, he said, "They made me feel like I was 10 feet tall and bulletproof." And I think that gives us a lot of insight into the lure of drugs. And it makes sense that if someone's been through trauma and they have that dysregulated nervous system and they experience that fear and that distress probably on a daily basis, then how they might get a reprieve from that with these mood altering substances. Right. So that risk is real, and you see it in the work that you do. And these are unfortunate statistics. And we want to be able to mitigate this. And there are some things that we can do. My first thought was we need to educate people on this. I wanted the principals in our district, I wanted the teachers in our district to recognize what ACEs were, and also know collectively as a group what our scores were. So I did something that isn't very common, but I anonymously and voluntarily gave them the option to find their ACE score. And when they did, we could look at these numbers of a group as a group and compare them to the original ACE study. And in our district, while most of us have an ACE score of 0, 20% have an ACE score of 4 or more. And this was really compelling, and it was really eye-opening for our administrators to recognize that while they're in a job or a role where they have a lot of influence, they make a lot of decisions. They're very, engaged with people on a daily basis. If 20% of them have an ACE score of 4 or more, which is equal to really high risk, then how did they get there? Right. And so I love this idea of resilience, that just because we've experienced these difficult things does not mean that we won't be able to thrive or get to the point where we reach our goals and find that meaning. The other thing that this always brings up, I have some people that will tell me, well, my ACE score is 0, but since I've been an adult and a parent, the people that I love have experienced a lot of ACEs and it affects me. And that's what the research shows. The data actually show that people who experience secondary trauma have as adverse effects, if not more, than those who experience it firsthand. And we know this originally from looking at soldiers who served in the war, those that witnessed that trauma, even though they maybe didn't get injured or hurt, they had equally difficult times with that. And in the work that we do, we see this. We are exposed to it vicariously, but also we have loved ones and we have families that are experiencing these ACEs. And it's just important to recognize that it does affect us. Being aware of some of those symptoms so that you can know if maybe support would be a good idea. So like fear, guilt, anxiety, apathy, a sense of hopelessness, maybe affecting your sleep, having nightmares or intrusive thoughts, feeling that hypervigilance or short-temperedness, being in denial or engaging in compulsive behavior or using drugs, all of those would be a good indication that you're probably experiencing some of that effect from trauma. And it's a good idea to ask for help and get support. You're probably really familiar with Bessel van der Kolk, and I love his work. And this is important to remember, that when people are struggling, it's probably not the result of defects in understanding. I have treated multiple people who could tell me their diagnosis, they could tell me their trauma history, they could tell me everything. I mean, they could sit in my chair and they could do my job, but what they couldn't do is they couldn't change their behavior. They were really struggling with where the rubber hits the road. So it's not that they have defects in understanding, right? It's that most of these problems originate in those deep regions in the brain that drive our perception and attention. So when the alarm bell of the emotional brain tells us we're in danger, no amount of insight will silence it. And this really drives my goal to help people learn how to regulate bottom up, because bottom up regulation is the nervous system first. It's how do I calm my nervous system? How do I use my sensory awareness, that mindfulness, whatever that is, how do I do that to get here, right? So top-down regulation to me comes secondary, depending on what the situation is. If someone has trauma, it's bottom up first. One thing I'm always about rubber hits the road, because it's great to learn a bunch of stuff and it's great to learn all this. But if we can't apply it and if we can't make that change in our life, then where's the gap? Where's the breakdown there? And so I try to do what's worked for me and what I've seen work for other people when the rubber hits the road. And I once had a client who was addicted to opioids. He'd been addicted for most of his life since he was a teenager, and he was in his 50s at this point when he came to see me. This was residential treatment, so he had a home pass. He needed to get some things done with his wife, and unfortunately was arrested because he had a warrant. And so when he got pulled over, they took him in. He didn't realize he had a warrant, and they wouldn't treat him the same way that he was getting in his treatment center. He wasn't getting the same medications to help keep the side effects at bay. And so for 5 days, he was just in a jail cell with no access to a therapist, no access to medication, and he was by all means suffering. And I was fascinated because when he got back and he was able to talk to me, he said the only thing that helped me was mindfulness, Tami. He said that those practices that we've been doing, the mindfulness and meditation, he said, I was able to do that. And it's the only thing that got me through those 5 days. And to me, that's rubber hits the road. Right? That was him being able to access a practice and something that we had repetitively engaged in the moment when he needed it the most. Kiddos and adults, even people, anyone who's experienced trauma, because of that sensitized amygdala, they become hypervigilant. And so our kiddos in school, they're looking to us adults, they're wondering if we're safe. They are looking to see, you know, are they going to hurt me or are they going to help me? What are they trying to do? And this is unfortunate because most of our kids come to school ready to learn. Their prefrontal cortex is accessible, but our kiddos with trauma, they have to do all this organizing and analyzing, right, to make sure they're safe before they do this. It kind of reminds me, I don't know if you've ever watched an elephant get a drink of water or a giraffe. Now, a giraffe has really tall legs and a really long neck. It's really not conducive to a watering hole on the ground. And I don't know if they do this at the zoo or if they just do this in the wild, but I was able to observe a giraffe in the wild. And he came up to the water hole. And before he would get a drink of water, this is what he did. For at least 5 minutes, all that giraffe did was look back and forth. And what was he doing? He was listening, he was looking, he was using all of his senses to ensure that his environment was safe before he got a drink of water. Because if he's going to spread his 2 front legs out and dip his head, that neck, all the way down to the ground to get a drink, he is going to be easy prey, right? He knows that that's a vulnerable position to be in. And so he makes sure he's safe. That's hypervigilance. That's what these kids are doing, right? They're assessing that environment. Am I safe? What if I make a mistake? What if I do something wrong? What will happen to me? And so it's important to help create these psychologically safe environments for our kiddos. Some of our kiddos will show dysregulation. They will have difficulty sitting still, worrying about what's going to happen next. This can really break down the immune system over time. And another wise word from Bessel, right, is the single most important issue for traumatized people is to find a sense of safety in their own bodies. Let that amygdala relax. Behavior is communication. So we can see, what is the student trying to tell me that they can't articulate, right? And this is with everyone. Behavior is telling us what they can't say to us. And so we just have to be that emotion scientist, that detective, to determine what are they trying to tell me? What's the unmet need here? And it's all about discovering those unmet needs. Children do well if they can. Dr. Ross Green wrote some really great books. The Explosive Child, he also wrote Lost at School. And he really looks at this behavior as lagging skills. He says children doing well is always preferable to doing well, right? So they must not have the skills to do well. And if they lack the skills, then we need to teach them the skills. And it all comes down to that skill replacement. So we really try to look at our kiddos through the same lens that you probably do of Maslow's hierarchy. Are their physiological needs met? That's first, then safety. And we can do that by the environment that we create, right? That's our behavior. It's us not raising our voices. It's not having angry faces or, slamming the table or the door or any of those things. We have to create that psychologically safe environment and regulate our amygdala, even though we're going to have amygdala activation, right? Because we're just designed that way. We're people. But when we can create that safe environment, then we'll be able to connect with our kiddos and build those relationships will then allow them to learn and increase in their confidence. And so that's really the goal that we're looking at. We want to give them an experience where they can grow new neural pathways. That I learned early on when I had clients that could just cite, every great modality out there. But why aren't they doing it? Because they're not doing it. And you have to do something to create a neural pathway. And our brain can change, but it can only change with experience. So we actually have to put forth the effort. We actually have to do the thing differently, and probably have a lot of reinforcement in the beginning, especially to do that. To maintain that, especially with our people who unfortunately get addicted to substances. What is more reinforcing than that? I mean, the brain sensors that take in dopamine and those feel-good chemicals, they want to feel that. They want to feel good. They want to feel pleasure. And so what can be more rewarding than that? And studies with the rats show us over and over again how rewarding those dopamine centers are. So how do we do that? This is a challenge for us. But thinking about the area that you work in, what is your agency's nervous system? We all have a nervous system, and where we work has a nervous system based on the collective nervous systems of all of us, right? So how does it feel? When I talk to schools, how does your school feel? How do you create a psychologically safe environment? How do you not just tell kids that you care about them and that you're glad they're there, but actually help them feel that, so that they can trust and believe that? Because they probably won't listen to our words, right, as much as they're going to watch our actions and see if our actions match our words. This is something that I think can be really helpful for all of us. I was working in residential treatment for young women with eating disorders at one point. And these girls were medically fragile a lot of the time, most of the time. And we had an experience that I'll tell you about in just a minute. First, what does that have to do with ziplining, right? Well, all of my experience comes together in some form of meaning. I was ziplining in Mexico. And I was so excited to just get out there and do the thing and, just sail through the trees. But before we could even drive out to the location, our guide said, "I'm going to teach you the most important word you need to know today." And I was like, "Oh, I guess I wasn't expecting that. All right, I'm ready. What's this word?" So we're all just captivated, like, what's this word? And this is the word. And so for any of you who speak Spanish, maybe somebody can unmute and share out what this word is in Spanish.
Jordan put it in chat and he said, "Help me."
Yes, thank you. Help me. And a light bulb went on, right? And I thought, are we intentionally teaching people how to ask for help? And my brain just made all of these connections. And see, I had to experience it. I had to be in a situation where I wasn't even thinking of this. I was just so excited to go and have fun. And then it was like, well, yeah, because what if I did get in trouble, or what if something did happen and I wouldn't know what to do? And I don't know that we do this enough. I don't know if we intentionally share this with people. And it made me think again of that same client I told you about earlier that spent 5 days in jail without any support. And one thing he told me, he said, Tami, he said, because he dealt with this his entire adult life, right? It was from a football injury in high school. And he said, every time I go to the doctor's office, every time I go to the dentist's office, he said, there are signs that say we prosecute for illegal, all the signs, I can't remember what they say, but you guys know them. They used to be everywhere, right? We prosecute. And he said, not one sign says how I can get help. And I remember that day. This was many, many years ago. It was pre-opioid epidemic education. And I shared that with our hospital administrators. I said, it's interesting that my client brought up a really good point, that we are instilling fear instead of telling them how they can ask for help. And I immediately was reminded of that. I immediately thought of that. And I thought, are we teaching people where to go? And then at the same time, let me go back to that. I'll finish my story at my treatment center. We had a young lady one night when we were, I wasn't there on shift that night, but they were doing tennis, and one of our girls collapsed. and she needed CPR before the ambulance could get there to get her to the hospital. And of course, we were all worried and concerned. Fortunately, the CPR saved her life and she was able to get a pacemaker. And the next day when I went on shift, my immediate thought and feeling was, would I have remembered CPR? What if I would have been there and I didn't know what to do? What if I couldn't remember like how many breaths and how many compressions and just being in that panic mode? And I thought, I've got to go ask the nurse, right? I've got to go ask the nurse to review these steps with me. And then I doubted myself because I thought, well, she's going to say, well, if you don't know that, then what are you doing here? That's an expectation. Like, you guys all have to know CPR. These are medically fragile girls, right? So I was just imagining that that if I asked for help, I would look dumb and maybe even get in trouble. And what I didn't know at the time was this: when the Gaines Foundation surveyed over 2,000 leaders, they all cited the number one behavior that people engage in that makes leaders trust them more is asking for help, right? Makes total sense. But how often don't we ask for help because of that ego, because we're worried about, well, I won't look perfect. I'll be vulnerable, and maybe they'll fire me, like, because if I can't remember the steps of CPR. But I was fortunate in that they created a psychologically safe environment for us. I did go and ask the nurse to help review the steps with me to make sure that I knew what they were. And I was praised for that. And I was given really positive feedback for going to her and for doing that. And I think, how often maybe do people miss out on getting the help that they really need because of all of these things? And isn't that why there's so much stigma around mental health? Because forever, so many people view it as weak. And it's absolutely has nothing to do with weakness. Trauma has nothing to do with weakness. And so we tend to armor up to protect ourselves, right? We tend to just shut it down, walk it away, and then get really stuck on what we know. What happens is we get more up in our head and we sacrifice our heart for this, which can be problematic, because then emotions not attended to can grow, and we know they're contagious. And so we'll share them with other people. And if we're not aware of how we're feeling, then we don't really know how to do something different. And a lot of people aren't aware of how they're feeling or how they got there. So over time, this can be problematic. And I loved this. Brene Brown, I actually was reading one of her books when I came across this, and she talked about Manu Shafiq and how she said in the past jobs were about muscles. Now they're about brains, but in the future, they'll be about the heart. And I think all of us who worked through COVID recognize that that was a test of the heart, right? And even still to this day, we are here. And isn't this interesting? We know teaching's challenging, and I imagine your jobs are challenging too. When I look at what teachers do every day, trapped in small rooms, right, with an unpredictable assortment of personalities, energy, needs, they have to make hundreds of exhausting decisions over and over. They're put in situations that test their confidence and wear out their patience and break their hearts because they know their kids are in trauma. And, in some parents' eyes, they can never do anything right. And so you can learn all the techniques, plan all the outstanding lessons. You can even set up perfect classroom management. But to do this work and stick with it long enough to get good at it, you need a level of emotional resilience that most other jobs will never require. And you're in the helping field, I'm in the helping field, and we know that that requires emotional resilience. So how do we get that? How do we obtain that for ourselves first, especially if we've experienced trauma in our lives, and then so that we can help the people that we serve? So I have this little snippet here about the physical heart, right? We depend on it for our life. But this is the universal metaphor, right, for how we can love and be loved. And I'm just going to go through this really quick just because I know we only have a little bit of time left. But I want to just share with you when rubber hits the road, I went through something really difficult in the last couple of years. My dad was diagnosed with cancer, and it was really tough to take care of him and to see him like that. And I was getting to the point where I was armoring up, and it was just protection, right? Because this is painful. And my little guy opened a jar of M&Ms on movie night, and the first one he took out was this little heart-shaped M&M, and he brought it to me. He sought me out and said, "Here, Mom, this is for you." And I really needed that in that moment, right? And what it did is it helped me realize that I was armoring up and I needed to be open and I needed to be present because I wasn't noticing the little things. I wasn't finding the joy in movie night with my family. And it reminded me I needed to do more self-care, right? And that would really help me. So in the moment, that was really helpful. That I felt like built my resilience in that moment. Then the next day he wanted to make cookies. And I said, well, I don't know, I don't know if we have time for that. I just wasn't feeling up to it. But then I remembered last night and the M&M heart, and I'm like, okay, I'll do it. Well, I don't know about you, but I soften my butter in the microwave. And I've been doing this for years. So imagine my surprise when I took this bowl out of the microwave and this is what I saw. And this is second day, second heart. I was like, I really think that this armoring up thing is, just sending a message out there that I need to soften up a little bit. And this is what I learned that day is that I needed to have more self-compassion, not just for me, but for other people, right? I needed to normalize adversity, that it happens to all of us. And so how in that moment I could get up and I could serve, I could help my family and help my son. And I also learned the value of instead of asking people, how are you? Ask them or say, it's good to see you. Because if people aren't doing well, they either have to lie and then they're going to feel worse, and so just, it's good to see you, not knowing what people are going through. And then a couple of weeks after my father passed, I was eating on the go and I opened my granola bar and I found this. And you guys, I mean, I can't even tell you how many hearts have come into my life in the past year since this happened. And why am I telling all of you this? Well, some of you might remember this date. And this date is important because it was the day when the concentration camps were freed in World War II. And Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he was in 3 years, 4 different concentration camps, and this is Birkenau, and he was also in Auschwitz. And what he found that his survival was based on certain things, all listed here and all in his book that I would encourage you to read. But he really felt like it was finding meaning in so many things. And that last one here, he found meaning in glimpses of beauty. He talked about in that book that he would look out and he would see the trees and he would see beyond the fences, and he would find beauty in that moment, that they would watch the sunset. They would find meaning in that. There was also art in the camps, but what he said is that he got to choose how he responded to his suffering, right? It was creating that space, that famous term that we know from Viktor Frankl, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And that's what we need to teach people. How are you using that space? Because none of us control the stimulus. That's out of our control. But we all get to choose how we show up and respond. We really like mind-body bridging. Utah State, they support and teach lots of classes for this. They even have a free class online. I can give you that info if you want it. But how do we do that? How do we how do we get from that suffering, that place of suffering, that small mind, to what they call that big mind, which is our natural resilience? And there's some things that I think that he talks about that are super important. Essentially, in short, this just talks about having a positive attitude versus having a negative attitude. And that really goes along with that small mind and big mind. It depends on what mind state we're in, but how do we get to the resilient mind state if things are so bad? That's a really good question. And so Viktor Frankl wanted to provoke people into realizing that they could exercise their capacity for choice to achieve their own goals. And so when we talk about resilience, there's really 2 key things there: finding meaning, right? And relationships. That is what will build resilience. And so think about your own life. This is a picture of the Butchart Gardens. And I don't know if you know the history of the Butchart Garden or Butchart Gardens, but it was originally a gravel pit. And the lady who lived on the property looked out her window every day and saw a gravel pit, and she got tired of it. She wanted to see something beautiful. And think of how much work and effort goes into keeping this garden this beautiful, but it's possible. And so no matter what our landscapes are, we can grow what we want, and we can weed out the rest, and we can choose what path we go down. We are empowered to do that. And the other thing that Viktor Frankl talked about that I thought was really important is this piece of serving, right? That we needed to get beyond just subjective pleasures to do something that was really meaningful. And if you ever get a chance to go to Boston, walk down their Holocaust Memorial, because you'll read this story. And this is a young woman who was in the concentration camp. And she said, a childhood friend of mine once found a raspberry in the camp and carried it in her pocket all day to present to me that night on a leaf. Imagine a world in which your only possession is one raspberry and you give it to your friend. And Viktor talks a lot in his book about how people would serve each other in the camp and how meaningful that was for them. And I thought this little gal needed that raspberry for her own nourishment, but she probably needed to serve even more for her survival that day. And so can we really look at that? How can we grow relationships? I'm going to go through some of these super fast. This is just some examples of that, but building relationships with our kiddos, helping them find, what's their purpose. Bob Ross is a good example. He was a sergeant, like a drill sergeant in the Army, and then he taught art the rest of his life. And I think it's pretty poignant that he said that he thinks that's what attracted him to painting. He could create any world that he wanted. Nothing hurts here, no pain, nobody's unhappy. It's a pleasant place. Everything's nice here. And can we empower people to do that, to find that purpose and that meaning and connect with them? And that's what I really teach the people in schools is how can you do that? Because we heal from trauma in relationships. Anything that increases the quality and relationships of our kiddos will build their resilience. We want to connect people, help them make friends and nurture families, dosing positive interactions, right? So my big quote is that you don't have to be a therapist to be therapeutic, because you just need to be present and kind, be attentive and responsive, just acknowledge them, that simple human connection of feeling seen, heard, and valued, because the most powerful form of reward is relational. People love to be sought out. They love to know they were thought of. So just little texts, little things, hey, just thinking of you, a kind word and a smile goes so far. And we can do that. That's pretty low-hanging fruit. Brene Brown talks about connection is that energy when people feel seen, heard, and valued. You guys are really aware of the secure attachment piece with the parents you work for. So I'm going to kind of go through to get to the end here so that we can end on time. But one way that we've done this is by establishing wellness rooms. And I had the privilege of being able to write a curriculum to support this, and the kids like it. The kids tell us it sends the message the school cares about our well-being, which is a win when they get right through the door, right? It's tier 1 prevention, meaning it's for all of our students, and they learn skills and they get to do it in the moment when they need it in real time, right? Rubber hits the road. It's like, am I going to think about doing it, or I'm actually going to do it? And we can identify kids' needs early on so that we can help prevent those negative outcomes. We have seen an 80% increase in self-regulation. We've seen an 80% decrease in office referrals, a 90% decrease in phone calls home the first few days of school for somatic complaints like stomachache, headache, and 100% decrease in physical restraint and seclusionary timeout. Our first grader, little guy here, said that he used to be in the office all the time, but now he can just stay in class because he's learned how to regulate. So we get great experiences. Our SHARP data, which is the Student Health and Risk Prevention Survey that we do every other year in grades 6 through 12, shows a statistically significant difference in 17 of the 21 questions when we compared schools with wellness rooms to schools without wellness rooms. And so even our recent statistics are showing us that kids in schools with wellness rooms are experiencing better mental health. And I think it just has everything to do with this approach of building resilience, right? And where the rubber hits the road, teaching those skills. ED visits in Washington County compared with the state were lower. We're the pink line here. And it's fun to see dips when, unfortunately, there are spikes in other areas. And so we know that it is helping. Our kiddos continue to tell us, like this one, that before she just wouldn't come to school on the days that she was feeling anxious, but now she comes to school because she knows she can take a break in the wellness room. We do have more MELS visit, which is great across the board. Not every school is like that, but across the board, kids recognize that sometimes they just need that break away from the noise. Something that's cool is we know that over 50% of our visits are repeat visitors, and considering 50% of Utahns don't get mental health support because of the high cost, we're meeting that need. And 17% of youth experience a mental health condition, and 21% of our kids that visit the wellness room come 6 or more times. So I also think we're doing a good job in meeting that statistic. This young lady came in, doubted that we could help her, and then sure enough, she was able to feel better when she left, and she just laughed and said, "Oh my gosh, this room actually works. I feel so much better." So I have lots of data for this. I know that we're out of time, so I just want to kind of hurry through and just remind everyone that that our kids are being supported and helped. But it takes a whole school-wide approach. It takes everyone, and it takes safe connections at the heart of that. We can't just tell people they can trust us. We actually have to show them. So I'm going to end there because I am over time, and I'm sure you have questions. So go ahead and open the floor for any questions you might have for me.
So if you pull that out.
Tami, that was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I'm going to just open up mine to the gallery view. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and just unmute yourself or raise your hand. And
Will you put that USU link in the chat?
Yes, it will just take me a second
Thank
to
you.
find it. Yeah, and just with that, Utah State teaches mind body bridging, and they do an online class for free.
Now, keep in mind, in the next month or so.
so is there, I do have one question, Tami. Is there a way, if you do not have those in your schools, to advocate for a wellness room in your school, or is there something that each school has to go through?
Yes, you can do a lot to advocate.
Now on that.
We find that works really well. The thing about having a wellness room work is making sure the school's on board with it. So it really is important that the administrator is on board, that the school is willing to take that on, because it is that school-wide approach. It's that we have to look at mental health differently. We have to look through a trauma-informed lens. And so that means we do things differently. But I have a whole system. If people are interested, they are welcome to reach out to me. You can email me I'll put my email in the chat as well. The problem is I'm not finding the chat. I'm not sure how to, oh, there it is. There's the chat. Okay. So I'll send this out. This is that's the link for the mind body bridging that Utah State teaches. And then I'll put my email in the chat as well. I would love to talk to you or answer your questions if you're interested. And yeah, we have in our district, we have 35 wellness rooms, and then I have 37 other rooms throughout the state that use our program, and they've all been able to replicate those same outcomes and results. So it's really looking like this is going to be an evidence-based support.
Well, great. Thank you so much. And I know everybody, when I come on unmute, you get a lot of feedback from me, so I apologize. So I am going to turn the time over to Tressa. She is going to be the one who does our case presentation. Again, a plug for just a case presentation. If it's a kiddo or a family or any situation that you're struggling with, please consider doing a case presentation. It's a great way to learn some resources.
But now. Thank you, Tami. That was very informative. I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was such a great opportunity. And I guess I can go ahead and log off.
You are more than welcome to stay, but I know you are busy. So if you need to log off, feel free to.
All right.
Thank you again.
Thank you. We'll
Thank
see
you.
you. Bye.
So I'm going to go ahead and share then. So my name is Tressa Johnston. I'm a physical therapist up here with the Up to 3 program, which is part of the Institute for Disability Research Policy and Practice. I'm presenting on a case that I've encountered. I'm going to give a little bit of a backstory here. This is a foster home that I have been going into, and I've been working with the 10-month-old. And as I've been in there, I've formed a relationship and gathering background and history on the child and the siblings. So there were 7 siblings, and 6 of those children were removed from the biological mother's house after one child, a toddler, passed away, and the biological mother went after the 14-year-old child. After the children were removed, the house was condemned and all of the children's hair tested positive for meth. The removal took place 8 months ago. At this time, the 14-year-old is with their biological father with a no contact order. The 13-year-old is with kinship, guardianship on the biological mother's side. And the 4 youngest children are siblings, and they are in certified special needs foster home. And their ages are 9, 6, 3, and 10 months. The foster home has 2 parents, and they have 2 teenage children in the home as well. The 10-month-old is receiving early intervention services. The 3-year-old is receiving services through the special education preschool, and the 9 and 6-year-old were determined that they would be better placement for them to be placed in a grade lower, and they are receiving some mental health services. The primary area of concern for the foster mother is the information and resources that will be available to the biological mother to access when reunification takes place. The foster mother would also like additional help on recognizing trauma and mental health concerns for future foster children who have experienced trauma. So a little more of the backstory is the DCFS is involved, and the biological mom was going through the process when she ended up going into court, and the judge had her placed more in the drug court system, which changed. So she now has a different caseworker, and the foster parent has a different guardian ad litem to talk to. So there was kind of a breakdown there, and that's where some of the stress on the foster parent has come through in being able to feel like there's connection with her, and also awareness of the children. And because the drug court changed, so they changed the biological's mom that when she completes her drug program, then she would move into reunification as she works her steps. At this time, the 9-year-old, once some of these visits started with the biological mom, now is vomiting several times a week after dinner, and asked a lot of questions regarding dying. What happens if she dies, or what happens if the foster parent dies, and what happens to her and her siblings, or what happens if the biological mother dies. The 6-year-old is also started demonstrating more aggressive behavior towards animals. The foster family has some small dogs, and the 6-year-old has started to attack the dogs and kick the dogs, or if she's holding the dogs, then all of a sudden she'll pinch or squeeze or try to harm the dog. The 6-year-old is currently only receiving bioneural-feedback therapy at this time. The foster parent is trying to get services increased because she feels like they need to be at a different frequency. The goals in looking at the situation is to eliminate aggressive behavior towards the dogs in the home from daily to never in the next 3 months. The 9-year-old, these are the foster parents' goals, is to reduce vomiting after dinner from 3 times a week to 0 in the next 2 months. And for her to gain educational strategies to reduce anxiety with the children and her own anxiety. The barriers that are kind of in place as the vomiting and aggressiveness has started with the reunification visits. And some of the reunification visits have begun to be unsupervised due to the biological mom's work schedule. There also seems to be some conflict in the children's understanding of where the biological mom is, and that they think that she's in school, and that's created some conflict and some confusion. Additional information that was given to the foster mom was USARA, which provides peer support for people who are in recovery that she could give to the caseworker if the caseworker needs that information. The Utah Parent Center to help with the children's testing who are in school and considering a 504 or an IEP, depending on what the school feels is appropriate. And the foster parent was recently given information for the parent-child interactive therapy, the PCIT program, and she will need to reach out to her caseworker to get that referral. The things that I wanted to bring to the table to discuss are resources and online programs or books that the foster parent can access to support mental and emotional health of the children. And also some other strategies that she can use in the home for vomiting and aggression. And something that that having worked in early intervention and in the school districts is how do we ensure the continuation of care between early intervention programs when children transfer or when children transfer from one school to another.
Awesome. Thanks, Tressa. Janelle had to hop off, so I'm taking over. But does anyone have any questions for Tressa before I put you in your breakout groups?
I just wanted to clarify that the child passed away and then the mother attacked, or it was the same incident?
It was the same. It sounds like it was the same incident, that the child passed away and then the mother went after the 14-year-old, blaming the 14-year-old because that child was the one who was supposed to be taking care of the kids. And that's why there's a no contact order with the oldest child.
Are there any other questions? Okay. So hopefully we can get you some good suggestions and answers to those questions, Tressa. Would you mind sharing your screen again so that the hub members can take a screenshot or a picture of that
Sure.
last slide, if you don't mind? And so I'm going to put you over doing 2 groups. So Tiffany Warwood, your group's going to do the first question about resources and online programs for the foster mom to support mental and emotional health of children. And then you'll also, we just have 2 groups, so you can also talk about the third question. So do the first and third question. And then Crystal, if your group could do the second and third question, that'd be awesome. So make sure you take a picture so you remember them. And then I'll go ahead and start those groups if that works for everyone. And we'll come back about 10 minutes before so we can talk about some things and you can get some suggestions, Tressa.
Thank you.
Okay, so those should be up. If you're able to see them, join them, and if not, let me know.